Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. We have with us today a returning guest in Randy Walker, both active in Vero Beach, Florida and New York City. He's a sports marketing, communications, and media specialist and the managing partner of New Chapter Media based in New York City. Randy's most noted for his work in the tennis industry, highlighted by a 12-year stint in the marketing and communications division of the USTA. Featured work on 13 U.S. Open championships, 22 U.S. Davis Cup ties, and 3 Olympic Games. Sports Illustrated went on as far as to label Randy the Roger Federer of tennis publicity. And on a personal note, Randy is the person who is responsible for introducing me to my co-host, Mr. Steve Flink, a Hall of Famer. It's a privilege to have Randy on with Steve and I tonight. Please welcome back to the pod, Randy Walker. Randy, we got the whole gang together, and thank you for introducing me to just a unbelievable individual in Mr. Flink.
I feel like I'm the person who introduced Martina Navratilova to Pam Shriver or John McEnroe to Peter Fleming. So,
Listen, I want to say, David, briefly, that for those that can't see Randy and that only listening here, he looks like he's ready to go out and play 18 holes of golf and shoot a 72.
Oh, well, make that more like a 92. And but I'm playing 3 sets of doubles before that.
Hey, for the listeners, we're going to have an unbelievable episode, and it's really going to be a lot of Randy and Steve just going back and forth in their stories because they have a lot of history together, talking about their books and just journey along the tennis world. But before we get that, I first want to talk to Randy briefly about, you just had your Vero Beach Futures event. It's tied to the Marty Fish Foundation, and that mission statement is to provide children the opportunities to participate in safe and impactful fitness, nutrition, and enrichment programs, empowering them to the healthy lives. Tournament has been in existence in Vero Beach since like 1995. Guys like Andy Roddick, Tim Henman, and others played it. You guys just finished it. How'd it go?
Well, it was really great. We returned to our traditional April date, and it's just so rewarding to work for this Marty Fish Children's Foundation and for this tournament. It's all the money that is raised at the tournament goes to the Marty Fish Children's Foundation, which helps at-risk children in Indian River County, Florida. So that's the main goal, is just to raise money to help children's lives. But, just from a tennis point of view, working at the $15,000 level, this is entry level professional tennis. So you're getting kids that are just playing their first tournaments. One of the traditions that we have at the tournament is when a player wins a match and earns their first ever ATP point, we have them, pose behind the Marty Fish Children's Foundation banner and hold up their number one, with, their first ATP point. This year we had a young 16-year-old player named Cooper Williams, who actually was born in New York City. And he won his first ATP point with Yvonne Lendl, Vero Beach's own Yvonne Lendl, watching on. Cooper had been Andy Murray's practice partner at the USTA National Campus, with Yvonne looking on. And Yvonne said, well, if you play a night match, I'll come over and watch you. So, of course, me being the tournament director, knowing that, I put Cooper Williams on at night so that Yvonne could get there. And Cooper won his first round match, won his first ATP point. We tweeted it out. Andy Murray tweeted, well done, Cooper. So that was good. But, one of the reasons why I left the USTA was I really wanted to run an event. I wanted to run events, and this fit perfectly for me. And it's super rewarding for me on many levels.
Awesome. It's so special when you do get that, when a player gets that first ATP tour event. And it's great that you highlight it and emphasize it, because as we all know, it's not easy to get those precious ATP tour events. Hey,
and in some people that's like as big as in their careers, winning a Grand Slam or making it to a Grand Slam for the first. I mean, it's a monumental achievement that people, tennis players, don't ever forget. We had a conversation with Tommy Paul recently, and we asked him, have you ever played Vero Beach Futures? What are your memories of that? And he says, that's where I got my first ATP point. So here's somebody who's top 40 player, and he still remembers that. So it's
amazing.
Definitely a hallmark achievement.
Oh, 100%. One thing I want to get before you and Steve start talking about a lot of your collaborative work together is, the first time I met you, Randy, in person was at Delray Beach Open. And, I've been going there for several years now. I love going down there, especially in February, getting the opportunity to leave the winter of Chicago to head down there. It's something I look forward to doing every year. You have a funny story about, when Juan Martín del Potro recently retired, a couple months ago now. You were ready to do a book launch with him at the 2020 Delray Beach Open. Tell a little bit about that story, because that did not exactly go according to plan.
Yeah, no, well, the bad luck with Juan Martín del Potro wasn't limited to just his health and his latter half of his career, but me trying to publish a book about him. So, this was, right. We're ready to, originally we're going to have it launched at the US Open, the year after he had gotten to the final. And then he had that mishap where he hurt his knee at Queen's Club. So we're kind of in doubt whether we were going to be able to launch it at the US Open. And I just decided, hey, you know what? I'm not going to take this chance. I don't think he's going to play. Let's hold off. And, he traditionally had played the Delray Beach Open, and it's a great market for him. And I knew I was going to be there. So we kind of planned everything to launch the book at the Delray Beach Open. And then sure enough, boop, he, pulls out and, obviously didn't play for many years. So my book launch was me sitting in the stands holding the book, taking selfies. So, but the book, was kind of slow out of the gate. But since he had that emotional retirement down in Buenos Aires, and we did some social media marketing with so forth, the book's actually done very well. It's called Juan Martín del Potro, The Gentle Giant, and you can read all the details of that failed book launch. I wrote an article on it called The Anatomy of a Failed Book Launch, Juan Martín del Potro. So, but yeah, Delray Beach Open is what a great tournament. The Barons do such a great job. And, it's really just a small, a great field, and it's very intimate. You get very close to the players. So, highly recommend going to that. I know I'll see you there next year, Dave. So
yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it. Now the fun stuff, especially for me, my part is basically done. Now I get to kind of sit and listen, because I get to talk to you and Steve, and I have a few books here. It's sometimes hard to see in the background, but I got the Pete Sampras book here. I got the greatest tennis matches of all time. Couple books here. I know you guys have worked together for years. I guess I'll start with Steve first. I mean, how did you connect up with Randy?
Well, I had known Randy forever, long before he even worked for the USTA. I used to go down and cover I did for ESPN a couple of times in the early 80s, the NCAA championships. And I would go down there for the weekend, and that's when I first met Randy. So I'd known him a long, long time. And then I was aware that he was starting when he started his company and he started publishing books. I was aware of that, and that's really was the connection. So then we had discussions about the greatest tennis matches of all time. Randy knew that David had done a book originally, The Greatest Tennis Matches of the 20th Century, came out at the very end of '99. And that so much time had elapsed. And in that original book, there was no Federer match in there, no Djokovic, no Nadal. So much had happened between '99 and a little more than a decade later that Randy and I talked, and I ended up writing a new book. And it was really half of it was there was a lot of new matches, and Federer and Nadal and Djokovic were all featured prominently. And it was great fun to be able to do that book, which I think had greater impact, especially because of the inclusion of all three of those guys. So that's really the origins of it. But I think the most interesting thing that happened regarding that book was I said to Randy, we were closing in the fall at the end of 2011. And I said, Randy, I knew we were going to be proofing everything and looking it over. It was going to have to close in early stages of 2012. And I said, Randy, what if we there's an incredible match in Australia? And he reassured me. He said, look, if there's something phenomenal, we'll get it in, I promise you. And I said, good, because I just feel like that would be a shame to miss out on that. Sure enough, we get the 5-hour, 53-minute epic with Novak beating Rafa in the Australian final in 2012. And Randy, that match hadn't been over 3 minutes, and I got an email from Randy saying, well, what do you think? Knowing he knew right off that I was going to want to get that in. And so it became the cover of the book, David.
Yeah.
And not only that, great second story. I don't think Randy knows this story. Randy, you'll tell me if you do, but I gave the book to Novak at the 2012 Wimbledon, and he was very inquisitive and wanted to know about the selection process and enjoyed seeing the cover, which was obviously a big victory for him several months later. Rafa was injured a lot that year, and he lost early at Wimbledon, didn't play the Open, so I didn't get a chance to give it to him till the 2013 US Open. And I showed him a listing, Randy, in the back. I ranked the matches in the back. And I said, Rafa, look at this. And I showed him where his matches were in the book, but also the ranking list, and having him against Roger in the 2008 Wimbledon final as the #1 ranked match. And he said, yes, that was a great match. But then he points to the cover of him standing on the court with Novak prior to that 2012 Australian. He says, but this was a great match too. That always amazed me, because Randy would know that that's the kind of thing very, very few players would do. They might joke and say, why did you have to put that picture on the cover? I wish you could have used another one. He's actually going out of his way to point out to me how proud he was to be part of that match and how it was a great match as well. I love that. I love that interlude with him.
What was your deadline when that match happened? When you got that text from Randy, what was your deadline and how you had to, because the book was basically done. Like you said, you were just keeping it open for the rare exception.
Well, I think Randy was pretty generous on the time, gave me a couple of weeks, whatever it was. He knew I wasn't going to take too long to just do that one. He gave me enough time to feel crazy rush. Everything else was all set and we'd looked it over. Everything was ready to go. So I remember getting it done over probably a 2-week period, I would say. And then it worked out. And then Randy starts pulling out the cover photos. He starts sending me photos from that, and we both agreed that this one of the two of them standing there right before the match, looking understandably apprehensive about a big moment ahead. And it just worked out beautifully. And the amazing thing about it, Randy, is that here we are in 2022. And Rafa's won his 21st major already. Novak trying to tie him in a few weeks at the French. And that cover is still current. Who would have believed it? I mean, they were so deep into their careers already. And here we are 10 years later. And that cover, it still fits.
I'm looking at the cover now. Their faces do look 10 years younger, but yeah, still relevant.
But I don't think either one of believe that, Randy, right? That cover right now would look so right.
Yeah, no, I mean, here it is. And it really is perfect. I mean, that's a great story with what Rafa and Novak said to you. And originally we were going to have Rafa from the 2008 Wimbledon final on the cover, but but this was just absolutely perfect, and it made the book a little bit more current. And obviously there's been some other books about the 2008 final. So this 2008 Wimbledon final. So this also kind of, differentiates from that. But, this is, I was going through it last night, and, the other thing, that's so great about this book is your rankings in the back of the book of the greatest strokes of all time. So what did Rafa say when you ranked him number 2 behind Roger as far as best forehand ever?
He didn't comment, but the interesting thing, actually, that was after the round of 16 that I gave him the book. He'd just beaten Kohlschreiber. It was the same night that Roger lost to Robredo, and we didn't get that quarterfinal that we eagerly anticipated. But then after the semifinals with Gasquet, I happened to be walking down the hallway after the press conference, and he ends up right next to me, and I said hello again, and he said, "Oh, I've been reading the book, been looking at the stats, I've been looking," and he was very enthused. And so he didn't make a comment about being too. At that time, I don't think he would have understood it was a tough call between the two at that time on the forehand. But I enjoyed doing the greatest strokes. I took a lot of time making those selections.
And I think what's so great about this book also is that, there's a whole generation of tennis fans who, scary enough for all of us, may have never seen even Martina Navratilova and Chris Everett play. A lot of these young fans, especially on, Twitter and social media, are just newbies, and all they know is Roger, Novak, and Serena and Rafa, but they don't know, how great, Billie Jean King was, and Althea Gibson, and, Jack Kramer, and so forth, and that they can read through this book and become educated about all these great players, pre, Roger, Rafa, Serena, Novak era. So, that's why I think this is really one of the most important, tennis books out there.
I won't put you on the spot either, Steve, but there may be a book out there in the future that could have some matches with young Carlos Alcaraz, and what Iga Swiatek is doing right now is unbelievable. I think as of recording, she's won 28 matches in a row or something like that. So if you had an interest of doing this in the future, I think you may be able to add to that list a little bit. Still a lot left to be played to see if they meet your criteria of one of the greatest tennis matches of all time. But I'm just throwing that out there because I know so many people love reading your books, and I know it's in the back of your mind.
The thing about it is, ever since we've done the book, and obviously I want to try to promote the book, whenever and wherever I can. And, anytime there's an epic match that goes on, I immediately email Steve and say, hey, what'd you think of that match? Would that qualify as one of the top matches, et cetera? And I always get a very detailed response from Steve that, meticulously analyzes the matches. He always does so well. And, puts it in perspective, kind of says, hey, the quality was just not quite as good as, this match or that match, and so forth. So, I mean, Steve is the expert on a lot of things tennis, but specifically in a micro point of view, he's the expert on the greatest tennis matches of all time. So anytime there's an epic match between Roger and Novak, I know we had emailed about that 2019 final, and some of the Stan Wawrinka, Novak matches, and so forth. I always email Steve and get his perspective, and he's always just spot on. And he has in the foreword of the book, the criteria of what makes a great match, that it has to be, two great champions, have to be late in the tournament, and and so forth. So the criteria that he uses is very specific and very thought out. So tip my hat to Steve.
No doubt. I want to talk about Steve's newest project, and that's the Pete Sampras book, because I thought that book was phenomenal, and I think I'm someone who may be able to take a more neutral approach, in that growing up as a fan, I always respected the heck out of Pete, but I was more of an Andre fan. So when you take someone from more of an Andre fan to read a Pete book, and to state how, and to be neutral, and to state how well the book was written, I loved it. I read it twice. Once just when I first got it, and then second in preparation for one of our favorite episodes we ever did, Steve, was the Pete and Andre episode. I listened to that a few times, and I think that was one of our best conversations. I read it and learned a lot more the second time I read it. I think you do that a lot of times when you read books. Certain things stand out the additional time. Talk a little bit about your work with that book as well. Again, the title is Pete Sampras Greatness Revisited. Fantastic book. Any tennis fan would love it.
Well, which way? Well, I guess let me start. Randy and I had talked about that for a few years. It was really a question of timing, and I understood that. But we finally we sat down and cemented it. This would have been sort of late 18. This was in 2018, Randy.
Yeah.
And, for me to wrap up the writing in 2019, and it came out in 2020. I just felt, and Randy understood this, and he got it too, because he's a central, crucial figure in the history of tennis. He's the greatest American player of all time, and in the argument for the greatest of all time. And he is too easily forgotten. I mean, just as Rod Laver was by the time Pete was dominating, it gets back to what Randy was saying. The younger generation, it's everything in front of them, and what's behind is quickly forgotten. And I felt that Pete, especially being a soft-spoken, self-effacing man, and he wasn't out there in the public eye the way John McEnroe has continuously been. It's remarkable how McEnroe stayed in the forefront with commercials and commentary and all the rest. So I just felt like Sampras had to be honored in this fashion. I also felt, David, that the book that Pete did with Peter Bodo, A Champion's Mind, which was the autobiography, was more focused obviously on his entire life and development, and the childhood was great stuff on the childhood years, but there wasn't so much emphasis on big matches and big moments that way. And I wanted from a biographical standpoint to correct that and get it down in more comprehensive detail and put it all in perspective, and then of course supplement it with all the comments from calling even Ivanisevic and Rafter and McEnroe and Lendl and all these rivals. And eventually I got to Novak, which was great. And they all were so enlightening with their comments, in addition to Pete sitting there, close to 20 years after retiring, not quite, and reflecting on it all from a different vantage point than he might have even had when he did his autobiography.
20 years. That's crazy. It makes us all feel old. It doesn't feel like 20 years, but
Randy, we first started talking. Yeah, but it was about the 2018 US Open. And, me being, the author of the book On This Day in Tennis History, obviously I, love anniversaries and so forth. And I said to Steve, we really should launch this in 2020, because
Right.
That's the 30th anniversary of Pete breaking through and winning the 1990 US Open, the youngest male to ever win, the US Open. So, again, we had some bad publishing luck, as far as the pandemic and so forth, but it did come out in 2020. And, here we are in 2022, and, there's an anniversary now of two other, very poignant matches in Pete's career. And, that's the 1992 US Open final, which Pete actually lost to Stefan Edberg. And then also, it's the 20th anniversary of him beating Andre in the, adieu match at the, 2002 US Open final against Andre Agassi, which was basically his, eventually going to be his farewell match. But, I want to ask Steve, when you think about those two matches, those really are, in a way, two of the most important matches in Pete's career, because that 1992 final was kind of like kicking the pants, final that he was so disappointed in losing that he really never forgot the feeling of that loss. And then obviously, being, kind of written off in 2002 and everybody thinking he's washed up. And then for him to have that last flame of glory, in beating Andre. But, just talk about those two matches, Steve. I think that's, I think those are two of the most poignant matches in his career.
Yeah, absolutely, Randy. And as you know, I spent some considerable time in the book talking about them. The 92 Open, what people forget is he was not feeling well at the end of his 4-set semifinal win over Jim Courier. He was slumped over and he had to go on IV after, and it was he didn't get a lot of sleep. And the fascinating thing to me was that it was a very tough way to go into a major final. And he won the first set from Edberg and eventually lost in 4. And he was unhappy with the way he competed at the end. The 4th set sort of faded away fast after he lost the third in a tiebreaker. He had served for that set, should have been up 2-1. In any case, this is the one where he did a lot of self-reflection on that and was very upset with himself. And that's when he discovered, Randy, that it was in his mind, it was unacceptable to lose major finals unless he'd spilled his guts on the court and given it absolutely everything he had, which I thought he had. In many cases, that'll happen after someone has had a chance to go up 2-1 at the 4th set. The momentum is with the other guy, and Edberg was on a spectacular run himself. But yes, that was a victory in defeat, because it was a self-awareness moment that he took with him for the rest of his career. And then everything turned in 93, Randy, as you know, where he finally got his second major at Wimbledon, beating Courier, and he won the US Open as well. And he just took off from there 6 years in a row, number one, which is a record that still stands, because although Novak has got 7 total years, he didn't do 6 in a row. So that's 92. 2002, he comes into the US Open. He's seeded number 17. He's lost in the second round of Wimbledon to George Bastel, a lucky loser out on court 2. So that was a kind of some would call it a humiliating moment. I would just say it was a very jarring scarring moment for him to lose that match on court 2 to somebody who didn't really belong on the court with him. But he comes to the Open having had a very mediocre summer on the hard courts, but reunited with Paul Annacone, his coach. And he wins a critical match in the 3rd round against Greg Rosetsky in 5 sets. And then he goes on a tear and he beats Tommy Haas and eventually Andy Roddick in the quarters, which was a big win, and topples Agassi in the final 12 years after beating Andre in the 90 final in the match that you mentioned when he became the youngest champion ever at age 19. So then as the second part of this story is now he took a lot of time to decide, what do I want to do? He kept pulling out of tournaments. He fairly soon decided he wasn't going to play anything more or kept wrestling with it, but didn't play any more the rest of that year in 2002. And then was still considering coming back in 2003. And he kept tossing and turning on that until he decided, no, I've had it. I'm done. So he's one of those rare athletes that could literally go out on top with a major triumph. I don't know whether this is going to be possible for a Novak or a Rafa, or it certainly would be highly likely for Roger at this point, but he had that opportunity. And I think that the big thing there, Randy, was he realized, okay, I could really push hard for Wimbledon 2003 here, but if he had had a Jimmy Connors type run to the semifinals of Wimbledon, had some nice wins and did really well and lost in the semis, that would have been such a downer after winning the Open. So anything less than winning a major was not going to be good enough for him. So I think it was a really intelligent decision to just take his time, take a period of months, be sure he's ready to go. And then once he did leave, he had no regrets whatsoever.
Very few athletes get to go out on top, and Pete definitely did so. And Randy, I want to get your thought on something, because I want to go back to a match. Steve and I talked about it with Brad Gilbert when we had Brad on. Steve had originally mentioned this to me, and I hadn't even thought about it. And I thought Steve really highlighted this point very well. And it was the 2001 US Open quarterfinal against him and Andre. And that was the 4 tiebreaker match. And the level of both players was incredible. Pete wins that match in 4 sets. But there was a standing ovation. It was a night match, remember? And there was a standing ovation at the beginning of the 4th set tiebreak. And this match was played incredibly. And everyone was, I thought, and I think a lot of people thought that this was a standing ovation for this one match. The level was incredibly high. Steve actually made this point, and I thought it was so well thought out. We didn't know how many more years Pete and Andre were going to compete at this level. And Pete and Steve said he thought that standing ovation at the beginning of the 4-set tiebreaker was not only for that match, but the appreciation of their rival. And so many great matches between Pete and Andre. We asked Brad about it. Brad said he didn't really think about it that way because he was too close to the moment. He was worried about that specific match. But when Steve mentioned that to me, I didn't even think about that. And I think Steve is so on point. Randy, your thoughts on that?
David, just a interjection. The thing about it, Randy, was I felt like they didn't know how many more times they were going to see these guys. They would never have believed necessarily that then a year later they'd be meeting in the finals. So my feeling was that was for the breadth and scope of their careers. That was like, you've given us a great match tonight and you've given us so much pleasure across so many years, and we want to let you know it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree 100% with you, Steve, that it really was an appreciation for both players. I mean, they're 2 of the greatest American champions, and the U.S. Open loves their American champions. So I remember that night.
I also want to, sorry to interrupt, I don't want to forget this point, to show you how fair our friend David is. Our colleague Richard Evans, who you and I both admire, and we all admire immensely for his extraordinary body of work going back to 1960 when he was ghostwriter for Althea Gibson on a column in London. Richard wrote a book recently on the history of tennis and tried to make the case that tennis fans and historians would debate, the debate would go on about whether Sampras or Agassi was the greater player. It was a chapter essentially on the 90s. And I wrote a review of his book and gave him a very good review, but that was the only thing I took him to task for, was that to me that yes, Andre, the one thing he did that Pete couldn't do was to win all 4 majors, get a career Grand Slam. Good for him. It was a great achievement. But to me, when you have these 2 guys and you analyze their careers, and I know Dave, this is where I admire David for stepping back and taking his Agassi cap off because he admires Andre so much. But to me, you can't do that. I mean, Sampras beat him 4 out of 5 major finals. He won 14 majors. Andre won 8. He was number 1 6 years in a row. Andre finished 99 at number 1. To me, the comparison is not there. As great as Andre is.
And I think Andre would agree with you, Steve, by the way.
Yeah.
I think Andre would agree with you.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that I've said in the context of, John McEnroe, is, there's the greatest tennis players of all time, greatest American tennis players of all time, but then there's also the most famous tennis players of all time. And I think that, Andre's name and image and so forth, is a little more famous than Pete, despite not winning any majors. And same thing with McEnroe. I mean, I remember being in the jungles of Zimbabwe with him when he was a Davis Cup captain. We saw some, trekkers walking by the path was us, and I heard them say, "Look, that's John McEnroe." So here he is, like already, people knew who he was in the jungles of Africa, and I think that's with Andre too. I think Andre and John's, brand and their fame, whether it was for a haircut and jean shorts or, yelling at umpires, their fame was bigger than Pete's. And that's okay with Pete. Pete just wanted to be the best player, and he could leave the jean shorts and the arguing and everything else to John and Andre. So,
no,
so
exactly.
I give Andre the nod on fame over Pete.
Yeah, I think Pete would be fine with that, Randy. But I just meant that when it came to achievements, when it came to what they had accomplished, then the comparison wasn't there, despite the fact that Agassi had a spectacular career.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. No,
that was a great rival. Hey, you guys have spent so many years in the tennis world. I want to ask you both, and I'll start with Randy. And it may not, I want to ask your favorite event to be covered. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the tennis court. You've done a lot of work promoting and marketing big time events and some of the biggest events the tour has to offer. So I want to ask you, Randy, and then I'll pass it on to Steve. What's your favorite event that you've covered over the course of your career? And if you have a couple that are very close, you can mention more than one.
Well, for me, I had the great privilege of being the press officer for the U.S. Davis Cup team, from 1997 to 2005, and I mentioned it a little earlier, and we still talk about it just so enthusiastically. Was the USA versus Zimbabwe Davis Cup tie in Harare, Zimbabwe in 2000? John McEnroe's first ever tie as the captain. Andre had just won the Australian Open and flew from Australia directly to Harare. He beat Pete in the semifinals there, and Pete actually got injured and couldn't play, but it went down to the fifth match, and Chris Woodruff, who's now the head coach at the University of Tennessee, won the fifth match and deciding match against Wayne Black. But just the atmosphere that was there and the craziness there and the excitement with John McEnroe as captain was just amazing. You had, Robert Mugabe, the Zimbabwean dictator, overseeing the draw. And we had the draw ceremony at his palace, and we had guys with machine guns. And I tried to take a picture of the security detail, and guy hit me with a machine gun and said, "No photos." And, just the craziness of that tie. And, all the media that were there, Philip Bondi from the New York Daily News, Lisa Dillman from the LA Times, Bud Collins, there were so many media there, and every time we see each other, pretty much one of the first things we talk about is that USA Zimbabwe tie. I just was with LeVar Harper Griffith, who was the practice partner for the U.S. team that week. I saw him down at the Vero Beach Futures, Marty Fish Futures, and we still talked about that and just how fun it was to be there and the craziness. So in all, just Davis Cup for me, the old Davis Cup, 3 out of 5 sets over 3 days, home and away, in Spain, in Great Britain, etc. But specifically that USA versus Zimbabwe tie, and even that whole year with John McEnroe. Just being in his presence and just the electricity that he would bring to, Davis Cup, and the whole atmosphere was just so thrilling. I feel like I should do a book just on that tie, or a documentary just on that entire season with John, because it just had so many crazy stories from, the first match in Zimbabwe to the semifinal loss to Spain and Santander, Spain. It was really spectacular. But obviously I've been to so many US Opens. I mean, the US Open is dear to my heart, and I've been to a couple Wimbledons, and Wimbledon is pretty special too. So I'd like to hear from Steve on that one.
Yeah,
I think I know the answer.
Well, Wimbledon stands alone to me. And I first went there in '65. I was about to turn 13 years old. That really kind of is what launched my career, because my father took me out there and I got hooked on the sport so quickly. Wouldn't miss a day in the newspapers after that. Randy went to Forest Hills at the end of that summer and grew from there. But I've always had the most reverence for Wimbledon because I think it's so impeccably run. The pageantry, it's just to me is a tennis event that transcends the sport unlike any other. And I think it's always, I love the fact that so many sports fans are paying attention, even more than they do to the US Open. I love the Open. The Open, when you can have a tournament 1 hour from where you live and be driving out there every day, that's a great feeling. And just the fervency of the fans and the enjoyment that they're getting out of it. And they're maybe not as educated as Wimbledon fans, but they are having a great time. And so it creates an atmosphere that maybe more resembles Roland Garros than Wimbledon. But I would just to look back over the years, two others that I'd like to just point to, David. 1972 Davis Cup final in Bucharest. I was lucky enough I was living with my father in London. I flew over with some British writers and photographers on a package deal and was able to be there for that historic weekend when Stan Smith almost single-handedly won the Davis Cup for the U.S. by beating Nastase in the singles and winning the doubles with Eric Van Dillen, and then winning the crucial match the last day over Tiriac 6-11 in the fifth to clinch it. And that was just an extraordinary 3 days. And the other one that stands out that Randy will remember well was when the Masters, what we now know as the ATP Finals, the year-end tournament, was played at Madison Square Garden.
Yes,
77 Masters, which was in January of '78. And there just were so many magical moments in that building. And I don't think I've ever been around those crowds were maybe in some ways there was something about the noise level and the atmosphere there that there was more of an intimacy despite the fact it's a big building, but especially those early years, with that first year, especially when
I remember those courts for that Masters Madison Square Garden. It didn't have doubles alleys. It was just the singles line.
Yeah. And Connors, the first one, Connors lost to Vilas in the round robin and then beat Borg in the finals. And I can still remember Frank Hammond up in the chair trying to quiet the crowds, Randy. And I love that tournament. Again, it was in New York, but I just thought for an indoor event, I've never experienced an indoor event quite like it. And I've been to many, and I used to love to go to the old US Pro Indoor in Philadelphia, but there was nothing like going to the Garden. And the women ended up having many great year-end championships there too. But I felt like that one, that's a standout among my memories.
This was so much fun for me, guys. I don't want to end this short. I know you guys can talk all day, but before we end, I'll kind of open it up to either one of you. Final points. Randy, if you have anything last you want to ask Steve, or Steve, you have anything last you want to ask Randy, I'll let you guys go. But for me, again, Randy, thank you for introducing, Steve to myself and us connecting up on the pod. And the three of us have continued to talk, you, me, and Steve. And it's been so much fun personally for me. With that, I'll leave it open to either of you, parting thoughts for anybody.
I'd like to ask Steve another question. As far as enthusiastic tennis fans in the world, where would you rate Dave? I think he's probably in the top 5. I mean, his enthusiasm for tennis is unbelievable. And I just get so much energy when I talk to him in person and when I read his emails. And when you hear that guitar riff at the beginning of the podcast, you're in for some great chatter. And I'm so delighted that you guys are together. So, Steve, I get to hear your voice as well on a weekly basis or so. But yeah, Dave, where would you rank Dave as far as his enthusiasm for tennis?
Well, I would say the top 5 sums it up very well, Randy. I might put him in the top 3, and I don't know who the other 2 are. I have to tell you seriously that I came on as a guest, actually, because of you, Randy. You put it together and you said, David, Steve's done this new book on Pete Sampras. And that was the first time we talked about the book. And I would have had I had really no idea that David at that point had been such an Agassi, such a passionate follower of Agassi's. But nonetheless, we had a great discussion about the book. But then at some point along the line, he said, how would you like to join me as a co-host? His enthusiasm is contagious. I feel it. It's something that I feel is something I've carried with me through my career. The fan in me has never left. So when I can join forces with someone like David, we're constantly texting Randy in the middle of matches. He's texting me. Can you believe that? How did you back from 4-1 down? I never thought he was going to do it. And I'll be back at him. And that's the way it should be. And that's the way I think it has to be. And I'm sure you'd agree, Randy, especially for a podcast. The listeners can tell if people are faking it. They know the people that really care. And I don't think anyone can say that either one of us doesn't have a deep appreciation of the sport. But I must say, it's nice for me that I can find somebody that shares my level of passion for the sport.
Well, it's tough to do, Steve, because you're the best, man. You're up there with the absolute elite, and it's been so much fun. Randy, Steve, thank you so much for this. I knew it was going to be great, and this did not disappoint one bit. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having us, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, David. Enjoyed it.